your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look back at what made headlines in Alberta this week. More charges have been laid against a 37-year-old Lethbridge man who was previously charged with voyeurism and harassment of a female jogger. Lethbridge police say Neil David Fox now faces charges in connection with an incident in which he allegedly approached a 15-year-old girl on her bicycle asking for sex. Police say he also exposed himself to a 54-year-old woman who was just minding her own business sitting on her porch. Fox has been remanded in custody and will be back in court on September the 18th. This past week saw the 22nd anniversary of a day we'll never forget. It was a day many first responders lost their lives due to an act of terrorism on 9/11. Members of the Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services paid tribute to their own fallen heroes by leading a procession through downtown Lethbridge, along with hosting a memorial ceremony. BCN's Micah Quinn has the story.
First responders from Lethbridge marched from Fire Station Number 1 to Southminster United Church for a special memorial service honoring 11 Lethbridge firefighters who have passed away in our city's history. During the ceremony, it was also mentioned that first responders face a growing list of occupational hazards while on the job.
Cancer is a serious side effect of fighting fires. Carcinogens in everything that we have in our homes today are real hazards, and unfortunately more and more firefighters are dying annually because of this. So today is just a way of showing appreciation, saying thank you, and keeping awareness to how dangerous our job can be.
According to staff within the department, there are 189 paramedic firefighters that work in Lethbridge.
We also have, I think about 30 to 40 dispatchers as well that are involved with all this too, and they're obviously included in this. They suffer lots of losses as well too, and they sacrifice just as much as the men and women on the street. It's important to remember and to give back to those people and their families that they're not forgotten, and it's important to us to celebrate them and to let them know and their families that their sacrifice doesn't go unnoticed.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Still with our firefighters, they are gearing up for the 9/11 Memorial Stair Climb, which will take place on September 24th at the Melcor Center. The goal is to ascend and descend 110 stories, which is the equivalent of the height of the World Trade Center before it came crashing down, following the terrorist attacks 22 years ago.
One of our opportunities that we are given is to do a firefighter stair climb that replicates the 911, how far some of those firefighters in New York climbed. We replicate the same kind of process. We'll wear a lanyard around our neck with one of the firefighters that day out of 343 New York City firefighters that gave their lives that day, to kind of remember them, sacrifice them, and it's another great way to raise some money for our charities as well.
For more information on the event, you can visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. The Royal Gala in Lethbridge has raised over $1 million as part of a fundraising campaign for the YWCA Lethbridge and District. New this year is a partnership between the YWCA and Grassroots Realty Group, which will be hosting the YWCA Gala on November the 28th at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center. Video journalist Micah Quinn has those details.
This event brings in a lot of people from around the area that are allowed to see, what kind of programs we offer at the YWCA.
Staff with the Lethbridge YWCA told us what the fundraising dollars from the gala will go towards.
Previously, the event focused only on Harbour House, but we do have a lot of other incredible programs at the YWCA, including Harbour House, our Hestia Youth program. We've got our Safe Visitation program. We've also got our Amethyst project. So this gala will go to fund all of those programs and support where it's necessary at the YWCA.
Stats Canada says 2 in 5 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Officials with Grassroots Realty said it was a no-brainer to be able to partner up with the YWCA for this important initiative.
I sit on the board of directors with YWCA, so it was very important to be able to continue to provide these funds for these programs, as well as just noticing that there is a deficit in the community of fundraising for YWCA and knowing that there has been some changes in the funding provided by the government.
According to the Lethbridge YWCA, the organization has been a registered society since 1951, and the group helps serve over 6,000 individuals per year. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
You know, there's so much more to come after the break, including stories from around our province. And if you want to see more, head over to our website, bridgecitynews.ca. The URL is at the bottom of your screen, or you can scan this QR code to get right to our homepage. We'll be right back. The trial for Tamara Leach of Medicine Hat continued this week, along with her co-accused Chris Barber of Swift's Current, Saskatchewan. The two helped organize last year's Freedom Convoy in Ottawa and are accused of mischief and encouraging others to commit mischief, obstructing police, and intimidation when they organized a large convoy of trucks into the nation's capital to protest against the federal government's COVID-19 restrictions. This week, the Crown showed videos of Barber trying to make the case that he and Leach used influence and control over a protest that was not peaceful. But in sharp contrast, while cross-examining an officer assigned to social media evidence, Barber's defense lawyer showed videos of Barber calling for peaceful behavior. In the video, Barber also thanked police for ensuring public safety during the protests and talked about the loving nature of the crowd. Haddam Keir is a lawyer with Charter Advocates Canada and joined Hal Roberts from Hamilton, Ontario, to discuss the case.
Haddam, will the video evidence being submitted help or hurt the defense team?
They're trying to establish that the protest as a whole was a mischief. And actually, one of the arguments that arose is that the defense is already admitting that fact. And so they challenged what the point of bringing this additional evidence is. But basically, the Crown is leading this as a kind of background evidence. They're trying to establish the facts about the overall protest. And then, presumably their strategy would be then to connect Tamara and Chris to that overall picture that they're painting.
Could either Chris Barber or Tamara Leach receive jail time if found guilty of the mischief and counseling charges?
Usually people who are being charged with mischief have maybe broken a window or committed some sort of an act of vandalism. That said, they are charged with mischief over 5,000, which is the more serious version of the offense. And there is a range, and it comes down ultimately to the impact of the offense. So from the Crown's perspective, they're going to argue that this was a massive mischief that affected the whole, or at least a large part of the city of Ottawa, and that Chris and Tamara are culpable for that.
Thanks so much, Haddam. That was Haddam Keir, lawyer with Charter Advocates Canada, joining us from Hamilton, Ontario.
The province says it is making our streets safer by bringing in stricter bail protocols. Officials say the new legislation will also include targeted prosecution units to address violent crime in Calgary and Edmonton.
Teams of Crown prosecutors with various areas of expertise will go after crime in Alberta's largest cities, especially in matters involving violence and targeting repeat offenders. These prosecutors will be tasked with familiarizing themselves with the downtown communities in Edmonton and Calgary and the types of crimes that are being committed. They will also be a key point of contact for law enforcement on files involving repeat violent offenders who are making our downtown communities unsafe to work, live, and do business.
Well, it is now official. Cardston is no longer a dry town. Council voted 5-2 on Tuesday, passing a bylaw that alcohol can now be sold at restaurants and golf courses. The opening of liquor stores, however, is still prohibited in the town. Cardston has been booze-free since 1902. Mayor Maggie Cronin reacted to the vote.
I want to say to my fellow councillors, thank you for the trust you have in a process. It's for you folks, it's not what you wanted. But yes, it might have a very changing effect on our town. We will not know until it happens. And do I have fears? I do. But I trust the people also.
Back in 2014, 2/3 of Cardston Council voted against allowing the sale of alcohol in their town. Well, it's late in the summer, but wildfire season is still in full force with more than 80 blazes still active in our province. This has been a particularly dry and hot summer, which has been a contributing factor to more than 1,000 wildfires in Alberta year to date. But all that may change once we head into winter. We spoke with the managing editor of the Old Farmer's Almanac, and please brace yourself. The Almanac is predicting a very cold and very snowy winter for us.
I think the one thing that I've noticed is that as far as the severity of the winter goes, in the prairies, Alberta is going to see really the brunt of it. It's going to be ever so slightly less hardcore as we move east. So a little bit, tiny bit less severe in Saskatchewan, tiny bit less severe than that in Manitoba. That's really kind of the only trend that I've been able to spot.
Coming up after the break, a controversial speaker whose speech was interrupted by protests at the University of Lethbridge in February is back in the Windy City. She is in Lethbridge this weekend to give a talk at a different location. We'll have the details for you shortly. You may remember the former Mount Royal University professor suing the University of Lethbridge after canceling her speech on wokeism. She went there anyway, only to be shouted at by student protesters. Frances Widdowson has been speaking out against wokeism and its impact on society. She's in Lethbridge as one of 3 guest speakers scheduled to appear at the Lethbridge Public Library this weekend to speak on the topic. Earlier this week, Widdowson joined Hal Roberts to discuss the lawsuit and what her critics are saying.
Now, you and your group are suing the University of Lethbridge for what? Canceling your talk on wokeism and not allowing free speech on campus?
That's correct. So Paul Viminitz, Jonah Pickle, and myself, Viminitz is a philosophy professor, Jonah Pickle is a student, and me are all suing the University of Lethbridge for violating our freedom of expression rights. And Alberta is a very good place to do this because there are some court decisions which say that the charter does apply to universities. We want to push this issue because I think of all places in society, universities are places where you should be able to discuss ideas, and that is no longer possible in many universities in Alberta today.
Now, many critics would argue that being woke is actually a good thing since we're aware of the social injustices taking place in society today. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think there are some elements of wokeism which are not a problem, which is, as you say, being concerned about various groups and their situation in society. The problem with wokeism, though, is when identity politics becomes totalitarian in nature. So it really is the autocratic character of wokeism that's the problem. And preventing any person from pursuing the truth or engaging critically with ideas is not beneficial for people, and it's especially harmful for groups that have a marginalized position in society, because it's through pursuing the truth and examining ideas that they can better understand the reason why they are so deprived in the existing economic and political system.
Communities across southern Alberta are about to see original Blackfoot names come back to life. A project aiming to resurrect the Indigenous language using signage hopes the initiative will enrich the landscape, invite people to take an interest in the history of our region, and move closer towards reconciliation. Several economic development and tourism groups partnered with the Kainai Nation to fund the construction of these Blackfoot signs.
Southgrow originally had the idea, and it was inspired by looking through some old documents in the Raymond, Alberta's museum, and we found an article from like the 50s or something where it was talking about how there's Blackfoot names for all of the names of our communities in different locations around southern Alberta. And why wouldn't there be? The Blackfoot people have lived here for thousands of years. And that kind of tweaked in my brain because we work on regional tourism projects, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if those names were front and center and we knew what they meant? And so went and started having some conversation, and we took it to council out on the Blood Tribe. And we said, this is what we'd like to do. This is why we'd like to do it. What do you think? And they were in. So we pooled our funds, we went out and got an extra grant, and we put together our pilot project to basically roll out signage across the region.
The project will invite communities, businesses, and institutions across the region to apply for up to $2,000 towards the cost of sign construction for their location. More information can be found on our website, bridgecitynews.ca. There are now 329 lab-confirmed cases of E. coli stemming from an outbreak at 11 Calgary daycare centers on September the 4th. Doctors say, however, there are fewer patients in hospital with serious complications. Officials say the increase in overall case numbers is mostly due to a delay in receiving lab results. 21 children are still in hospital, with most of them having issues with their kidneys. 7 patients are currently on dialysis. The Alberta government has launched a full investigation into the outbreak in Calgary.
And while our frontline workers are caring for these symptomatic and sick children, our public health experts are investigating to determine what happened and how to stop an outbreak of this magnitude from ever happening again. That work is underway, and we are working with Alberta Health Services to determine the exact source of the contamination. We know that the source is very likely linked with the shared kitchen, but we do not know what in the kitchen caused it at this time.
The Alberta NDP has demanded a full inquiry into the E. coli outbreak in Calgary, as a horrible inspection record of the kitchen which served the daycares has surfaced, including reports of cockroaches that were allegedly found. Up next, more on the E. coli outbreak. A large E. coli outbreak at 11 daycare centers in Calgary has the government scrambling a bit to not only contain the outbreak, but also to tackle a bit of a communications crisis. To chat more about this in detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who sat down with Hal Roberts. Take a look.
So the government held sort of its first big press conference on this outbreak on Tuesday, and the outbreak was, I believe, declared on September 4th, a week and a bit ago at any rate. And they said that, you know, they had a health inspection of this kitchen, found critical incidents, including pests, evidence of pests in the kitchen, which I believe were cockroaches, some sanitation things, stuff like that. So the public health team is doing this, like, it's quite a remarkable investigation, actually, when they lay it all out. You know, they're taking samples of food that was at the facility. They're taking samples of leftovers that had been served. They're interviewing people who fell ill for their food histories. They're interviewing people who did not fall ill for their food histories, and, you know, trying to sort of triangulate a bit on what actually might be the sort of ground zero, I guess, patient zero, or whatever the food was that caused this outbreak. It is worth noting, I mean, a number of, as you mentioned, of the kids in hospital are really, really ill, quite seriously ill. There's been blood transfusions. A number are on IV fluids, just because, you know, so many fluids are coming back out, I suppose, to put it a little delicately. And so they're under sort of close monitoring in hospital. There's 3 blood work clinics that have been set up at health centers around Calgary for people that need regular blood testing on this. So it's a big public health issue, for starters. But the other side of this is, as you mentioned, the communications part. And that has to do basically with the fact that the government didn't have a press conference for about a week. And as I said, it was a very robust press conference, lots and lots of information given. But the question did come up, you know, why did you wait a week? Why was it so long before there was a press conference? And the line that the government gave was, look, we've been communicating with the parents and the families before, you know, the broader public. And there was a bit of a gaffe when Dr. Mark Joffe, the Chief Medical Officer of Health, said, you know, he didn't feel any urgency to sort of update the public. And of course, he immediately sort of had to walk that back in a statement after saying, you know, what I meant to say was we were prioritizing the people affected first. So, you know, a little bit of a communications problem there. The NDP is calling for, you know, sort of a broader inquiry into what went wrong on this. But, you know, from everything that the government said, the public health officials said, you know, they are most likely going to get to the bottom of this, and hopefully everyone who's in hospital recovers and it doesn't get any worse.
Tyler, the province also moved to overhaul the bail system to prevent repeat offenders from doing some of those serious crimes. Officials say the first thing they're implementing is a dedicated urban crime prosecution unit. What will that really look like?
Well, they're basically going to be focusing on sort of urban crime in Edmonton and Calgary, I believe. And so that's going to be things like, say, drug houses. There are problem houses in certain neighborhoods. You know, these teams that will have sort of liaisons with the police and social services and things like that, and really sort of focus on some of these particularly problematic issues. Now, all of this, of course, is coming in response to the sort of increased amount of crime that we're seeing across Alberta and cities, rural areas, and across the country as a whole. The second one is they're going to eliminate what's been in place since 2017, and this is a triage protocol among Crown prosecutors. Now, back in 2016, the Supreme Court of Canada had a ruling called the Jordan decision. And what that did is it set a ceiling basically on how long it could take a person to go to trial. So if you're charged with a crime in September 2023, you basically have 18 months before that case needs to go to trial, or 30 months. It sort of, depends on the case. But you have a ceiling. The case needs to go to trial in this amount of time. And so in 2017, this triage protocol came in. And what it meant was that Crown prosecutors focused on the most serious, the most significant, the cases that they were most likely to secure convictions on. And then in the other cases, they might, for example, seek plea deals. The sort of controversy over this is that, of course, that leads to fewer crimes being prosecuted because they're seeking plea deals, et cetera, et cetera. So if the government drops this, they're going to be prosecuting more crimes. That's the idea, that more crimes are going to go through the court system, lead to convictions perhaps, lead to more jail time perhaps. The question is whether or not I think Crown attorney offices are well staffed enough, have the resources necessary to do this. Because, of course, the more crimes you prosecute, the less attention, the less people there are to take on some of these more serious ones, the ones that are coming up against those Jordan deadlines. So that's going to be quite interesting to see, I think, how the prosecution service across the province tackles that, how many more Crown prosecutors are going to be hired, what the funding is going to look like, so on and so forth.
There's more to come from Hal Roberts and Tyler Dawson after this short break, including Premier Daniel Smith's announcement to incentivize carbon capture technology development. There has been much heated debate in Alberta surrounding our energy and gas sector. Adding fuel to the opposition's fire was the UCP's announcement of a 7-month pause on green energy projects. But now Danielle Smith's UCP government has said it will roll out incentives for carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects. Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, explains more with Hal Roberts.
Tyler, Premier Daniel Smith says Alberta will have carbon capture incentives developed by the end of November. Now, this should really encourage more technology development and the installation of that particular technology, will it not?
That's the idea. Carbon capture and storage is a really integral part of Alberta's sort of plan to get to net zero, to reduce emissions over the next 25 years or so. And it's also, going to be key if we're going to hit the Liberals' sort of net zero deadline for the electricity grid, which I think is 2035, unless I'm completely blanking on that. So there's this desire to have some sort of tax credit incentive program to sort of develop these technologies, to get them installed on power plants and whatnot. The other thing that's kind of interesting that's happening on this front is Alberta's in discussions with the federal government to see what sort of other mechanisms, other levers can be pulled to get this done. So there's this whole sort of working group that Alberta's got with the federal government right now on some of these sort of energy things, which is, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, they're playing nice a little bit over here while still yelling at each other in public. So that's just another, I would say, component of these broader discussions, looking at some source of cooperation between the governments.
So now the province is also negotiating with the federal government to get federal tax credits and incentives in line with what the province really wants to achieve?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Say Alberta offers a tax credit for carbon capture and storage. Well, maybe the federal government maybe there's some grant funding or a tax credit that the feds can offer as well to sort of, further incentivize this sort of development.
Let's talk about West Texas Intermediate for just a moment here, hovering over $80 US a barrel. That could really help boost our bottom line here in the province. Could we potentially see any dividend checks like Ralph Buck's so many years ago?
I don't know. That does seem like the sort of thing that a populist premier like Danielle Smith might go in for. But, I do think this government has a good number of spending priorities. If you look at their mental health and addictions file, for example, building treatment centers, hiring professionals, there's big expenditures, I think. There's no sort of easy way to get around it. This is a pretty big spending conservative government. So I think there's a lot of priorities that they're going to want to put money into. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if we saw some more affordability measures. I don't know what those would look like, but that certainly wouldn't surprise me. The fiscal update a couple weeks ago now, I think they'd said that they were looking at a $2.4 billion surplus. And with oil prices sort of seemingly on their way back up, everyone in the industry is sort of predicting a strong finish to 2023. That could boost some of the numbers that the Alberta government's looking at coming into budget season next year. And so, you have to wonder where that money is going to go. Is it going to be affordability? Is it going to be some of these policy priorities? Is it going to be rebuilding the Heritage Savings Trust Fund? Is it going to be paying down debt?
Right.
In all likelihood, it's a combination of all those things, I would suspect. But certainly better than, going back to the days of what we were trading at negative prices not all that long ago.
Now, Tyler, there's also some talk that Premier Danielle Smith may invoke the Sovereignty Act this fall over fears of a production or emissions cap by Ottawa, speaking of oil.
The question is whether or not that emissions cap is going to amount to a production cut. The oil and gas sector says it almost certainly will lead to a production cut. And this is obviously rather unpopular with Alberta's Conservatives. And so there is some talk, among punditry and stuff like that about whether or not this is the sort of thing that the Sovereignty Act might be used for. It was, I think, always unlikely that the Sovereignty Act was going to be used for some sort of small potato policy files. But these do seem like the sort where they might try and do that. So as we've talked about before, the question is, what does this actually look like? If the Sovereignty Act is invoked, if the motion is brought to the legislature and passed, what does that actually do? And primarily it seems to be that will forbid Alberta government officials, bureaucrats, et cetera, from cooperating with the federal government on these files. So does that do anything? Well, maybe, but also maybe not. There's an awful lot the feds can just do on their own. They have their own bureaucrats and their own police force and their own whatever. So, but, it's primarily, I would say, political if it goes down that road, on some of the electricity grid stuff, on this oil and gas emissions cap. There's probably a pretty strong political impetus for the UCP to go down this road. But as we've always talked about, the effect of this, I think, is very much up in the air.
You don't have to go very far in Lethbridge to see the challenges with addictions and homelessness. Thankfully, we do have some dedicated people and organizations committed to providing help. After the break, we speak with Ken Kissick, the co-founder of Streets Alive Mission, an organization that is providing help.